My name is Terry, and we're here from Stitch House at Sew Dallas.
All right, and thank you so much for joining us in the first episode of our Good Neighbor Block Party Sew Along.
Emily, why don't you tell us where the name Good Neighbor came from?
All right, so we're excited to launch the Good Neighbor Block Party Sew Along because we know that all of the great sewers in our community really make a difference in our store. So we wanted to highlight every place that we are from and where we work and where we sew and where we live. We've got these kits that were mailed out. We've been putting together blocks pre-cut on our Quilt. We're pretty excited to open this up. Let's open it up. I'm gonna let you do that, Terry, and we can see what's included in our kit.
This first kit that we mailed out comes to you with a thank you from Stitch House at Sew Dallas. And do the honors.
A perfect little package. Okay, so you're getting 4 blocks in here. It's not bulky because we've already cut out the excess fabric for you. So whenever I open this up, what do we have here, Terry? We've got a Plano block. That's where we are.
And I have a Frisco block. That's where I'm from.
All right.
McKinney.
And Dallas. So we definitely wanted to highlight all of the places in our community that are really important to us. We'll be starting off with the Plano block because that's where we got started and that's where we are. That's where you all come to have our great events and our classes. So this is really special to us. We're going to start off with the Plano block. The whole community, the whole Dallas-Fort Worth community is very important. So throughout the sew along, every single week we're going to have a different block that highlights another special place in our community. Okay, so whenever we opened up every single bag, we are looking at some really beautiful fabric from Ruby Star Society. All the speckled line goes together really beautifully. And so we've got a variety in here that you're going to see come together each week whenever you tune into our videos. So it is a mystery quilt, so we are not giving away the whole thing just yet. And even on our layouts, you don't know what colors go where just yet. You have to tune into our video. But Terry, tell them a little bit about how we got all of these perfect pieces.
Okay. Well, when I was a kid, I remember my grandmother used to cut out these templates out of paper and cardboard, and she'd have me draw them on the fabric, and we'd cut these out, and we cut them with scissors. Now we can actually use rotary cutters and rulers, but even then, when you sew them together, you'll get something that's famously called a dog-eared. The nice thing about the Quilt is that it literally will cut those little pieces off on the end of your fabric, so when you do sew them together, no more dog ears, and so your pieces will go together. And you'll actually see that as we're sewing over these next couple weeks. These blocks will actually fit together perfectly. And that's the beauty of Quilt.
Okay.
So Emily, which block are we starting with?
We're going to start with Plano because that's where we are. We're going to reveal the mystery. This is what the final block will look like. All right. And so we're going to teach you how to make this block today. Let me go over to my machine and we'll get that set up for a perfect 1/4 inch, and then we'll teach you how to make this block. All right, so every time I sit next to my machine, I always want to make sure I get it set up for whatever project I'm working on. So I'm going to change my stitch plate. I want to do some piecing, so I can pop my stitch plate off and put my single stitch plate on, because that's what I want so my Quilt pieces don't get stuck into my feed dogs. So that's what I'm going to do first. I am also going to change my needle. So every time I start a new project, I like to have a good sharp needle so I don't have any problems. I really love the Floriani Chrome needles, the 7511s. These are just really great. They're really strong and I can use them for a little bit longer than some of my other needles. So after I change my stitch plate, I want to make sure that I am using the right foot so I can get my 1/4 inch. So in that case, I'm going to use the 97D foot and I'm going to engage my dual feed. The 97D foot comes with a really great guide that you can put onto your machine. So instead of being something that's attached to your foot, like a lot of feet, this one you can move and slide. So I've got some tools here that I can adjust that. So if I put my foot down, I can see exactly where my point is going to line up against my foot, and I can attach that to my machine. That way it's never going to move, but it is independent from my foot, and I can have a nice long spot right here to guide my pieces. That's one way that you can do a 1/4 inch on a Bernina machine, but a Bernina machine does have a few different ways to get a 1/4 inch with different feet. This is my favorite one. We're going to link a video for a couple other ways that you can get a 1/4 inch on a Bernina, but we're also going to link ways that you can get your 1/4 inch on your Brother machine and your Janome machine, because I know we're all going to be sewing on different machines for our Good Neighbor block. Okay, so I like to put my needle in last just so that whenever I'm putting my foot in, I don't have to dodge a sharp needle. But again, I'm going to use the Floriani Schmetz chrome needles when I'm doing my piecing. The flat back lets me know that I'm putting my needle in correctly. And I can get that tightened. Okay, so this is the layout that your blocks are going to make. This is the Plano block. We've got 3 components that make up this block. We have them repeating multiple times, but if you refer to your insert, you'll be able to see that we've got blocks A, C, and B. And whenever I'm referring to those blocks, this block right here, the green rectangle, is going to be block A. Block C is the yellow triangle, and then block B is the white triangle right here. So all of those things are listed in your insert, and this is what we're going to put together today. So AccuQuilt makes this so easy that if it were me at home, I would just get started sewing. But Terry tells me, he assures me, there are in fact some things that we need to do before we get sewing.
One of the things I like to do is, especially on triangles where there is a slight pull to the bias of the edge.
Don't pull it too much.
What I do is I will take flatter and spray a little bit on the bias edge and then press it. And then what happens is when you actually sew that seam now, it's almost like a piece of paper and there's no more bias.
Ooh, it smells really good too. I know you can't smell it at home.
God, it smells good.
We've got a celebration here and it smells pretty good. I'm gonna just break this down for everybody and just focus on one individual unit. So we're gonna make a full unit first and then we'll teach you some shortcuts. So I'm gonna move these out just a little bit out of the way. And this is what I'm gonna put together first. We can always refer back to our layout if we need to get our order back in place, but I'm gonna do this one first. And because I've got all of these corners cut off of my AccuQuilt blocks, I can line these up really easily. So luckily for your first block, you don't have to think too hard because we've got a solid white fabric, so it's gonna be the same on both sides. It's a totally symmetrical block piece that you can use either side of, but I'm actually going to arrange it this way and then flip it. So you can probably see right in here, I'm gonna just carefully line up my edge and line up my little corner. And because I've set my machine to a 1/4 inch, I'm gonna be able to sew exactly where I need it right here. So I'm gonna take that to my machine.
So Emily has now done our first seam along the bias edge, and what I'm going to do, rather than iron it and pull it, I'm going to lay it flat on the table and use this little seam roller. This actually will press the seam open, which is the way that she likes to piece, and then I will lay it onto the wool mat and simply lay my iron on top rather than pulling through the bias. Now look how nice and flat that is.
That's pretty flat. Thanks, Terry. Okay, so that was our first seam. Now we're going to do the second one. Again, I'm going to take this piece and flip it just like this. I'm going to carefully line up my blocks. My edges should be flat here, here, and here, and that is perfect. So I'm going to take that to my machine too and get my 1/4 inch right along this area right here. Okay, so look how easy that was. We had 2 seams so far, so we're already halfway through for our first unit for our block. My AccuQuilt gives me perfect piecing. I don't have anything hanging out, and I don't have to trim anything on my block. So the next thing I'm going to do is take my green triangle, and this is a fabric where we do have to worry about sides. We don't have any of that beautiful speckle on this side, just this one. So I'm going to put that side flipped just like this. I'm gonna line that up. I haven't been using pins so far because my pieces were pretty small, but maybe I will use pins on here so I can get those really accurate. I just flipped my block over. I haven't taken it to the machine yet because I just want to point out that my 1/4 inch allowance, the reason it's so important is that it's going to come right to this point here, right along my edge, and that way I'm going to still have a perfect point whenever I press my block. So I'm going to sew that on the machine right there.
So Emily just handed me her piece block, and now we're going to see exactly how good her 1/4 inch is. As we fold this open, look at that exact point right there. This is perfect piecing, and the nice thing about it is that you're going to get that every time with the AccuQuilt. And so I'm just going to push that over, and then I'll just gently lay my iron on there. So now that we have the perfect point, I'm going to actually flip this, and Emily is asking me to press the seam open.
Do you usually press to the dark side, Terry, or because I open my seams?
It depends, but normally when I have an intersection where there's lots of pieces of fabric coming into a point, I will actually press those open, but for the most part I'll actually press to the dark side of the fabric because I can lock my seams. And you'll actually see that on some of the blocks, as I usually will mix the two together. So there's never a one way is the right way or wrong way, but whenever I'm making garments, I'll actually press the seams open like this, and I'll use a seam roller, because see, this is just with the seam roller. I haven't even ironed it yet. So when I actually do come to the ironing part, I don't have to move the iron, and I don't have to pull my biases or anything like that.
Okay.
And now it's perfectly flat.
Well, for years, I would just always press to the dark side, but the first quilt I had that absolutely had to have a scant 1/4 inch, I couldn't lose that fold. So if I was pressing to the side, then I was losing that tiny amount and I wasn't getting my scant 1/4 inch. Ever since then, I've always opened. The only reason I wouldn't open my seams is if I'm gonna be quilting in the ditch, and I personally don't really do that, so I always almost open them now.
Well, I can show you, if I pull the two pieces of fabric, when you actually are quilting the quilt and you want to come down through this seam, and normally you would pull these two pieces open, and when you do that, the only thing that's holding your fabric together is the thread that you pieced your two pieces together. And so then you can actually cut those threads with your needle, and you won't know it until you actually wash it, and then you're going to have all kinds of chaos in your washing machine. Not that that's ever happened to me before, but
maybe I still need to wash my quilts.
but I want you to look how nice just the block itself with that nice point. This is the part where most people get discouraged, is because they might not have that point. And through our weeks of piecing, you're going to learn different techniques on how to get that perfect.
So, okay, what would you say to somebody, maybe if their point was a little flat? Would you tell them to rip your stitches and try again? Would you tell them just to keep going?
It really depends. So for me, sometimes I create such a short stitch that I can't pick it out, because I will sit there and do it until it's perfect. But like I said earlier, when you're using the AccuQuilt, it's very difficult not to have a nice point, and we'll show you that more with some of the blocks further in this series.
Okay, so far we've got one unit of our Plano block. So we've got a rectangle with our flying geese block, right? Okay, so this is one unit.
And this is the traditional flying geese block, and so I think a lot of you who have done them have never gotten this point, because I used to never get those during my piecing. But as I've been doing this for a long time, I've realized that using the AccuQuilt to cut those blocks is much easier. And so we'll show you more on the AccuQuilt later in the series.
So we just showed you how to do one block. You have an entire week to make your block, but if you want to go a little bit faster, we can actually chain piece. So I've got my blocks laid up. I have all of my pieces ready to go for that first unit, and I'm going to chain piece those. So again, I've got my 97D foot on my machine with my dual feed, so my pieces will feed through really nicely, and I've got my guide attached to my machine. Okay, so especially with my straight stitch plate, everything looks beautiful. I don't want to necessarily have to use scissors to cut my chain piece because, ask me how I know, I might have cut into my blocks before, but I've got this always sitting next to my machine. It can hold pins and other little wonder clips, but I can use that to really easily separate my chain piece blocks and not risk cutting into any of my work. Okay, so now that we have 4 full individual units, every single one of them is exactly the same. It's just rotated a little bit differently to make up our Plano block. Now we can flip these 2 together and sew along here. We can flip these 2 together to sew along here. And then we can press those open.
Yeah, Emily was polite enough to remind me that I apparently did not open all the seams because I pressed it to the dark. Like I said, sometimes I will actually do that. So now she's going to complete this block. We got one last seam. See, the distance from this point to here is the same.
So these are the points that I'm going to be really aware of whenever I piece these final 2 sections together. So when I flip these over and line up the corners, I'm going to run this along my 1/4 inch, but I'm going to be aware to meet these points right here when I take it to my sewing machine. And that's going to give us a really perfect block. All right, and there we have it. We've got the finished Plano block. This is the first one in our series. We've got 9 blocks coming total, and then we'll be quilting on them on our handy quilter. Along, this was our first block in our series, the Plano block. If you have any questions, comment below. Also, all of our social medias are linked below as well. You can follow along. You can post our hashtag Sew Along with Stitch House.
Hashtag, that sounds like breakfast.
Just
I don't know what it is. Go ahead.
Okay. Don't ask Terry about the social media.
Well, let me tell you, all my peeps, you can follow me on MySpace.